Navy officer Allen Parton suffered a severe head injury while on active duty in the Gulf War. It left him confined to a wheelchair, unable to talk, and he lost half of his life's memories. But more than this, Allen didn't even recognize his children. He had no idea who the lady was that he had apparently married. And he lost the ability to feel any emotion. But that all changed with a chance encounter with a dog named Endal, who was failing his training to be an assistance dog and needed a home. Endal became his 24-hour companion, aiding with every practical aspect of his life. He even helped Allen reconnect with his family, but this dog had to show his true devotion when in the dead of night, Allen and Endal were both hit by a car. No one could have predicted the life-changing impact that Endal would have had on Allen's family.
What happens after combat when you're injured and you don't remember anything from your past? And then you have a momentary encounter with a being that changes your life, that brings it back into perspective, that brings back your hope, restores your life and your love for humanity. I am Robert Asensio, and today on Bets and Badges, I have the distinct honor, pleasure to have a co-host, Miss Laura Spiro, the founder of Connecting Minds Miami. How are you?
Hi, Robert. Thank you very much for having me here today as co-host. Very excited to be here. Very excited to introduce Allen Parton from Hounds for Heroes.
Allen, can you give us a brief blurb of your background? So you were a naval officer and you were injured, and what you're doing now.
Right. Well, I joined the Navy as a young 16-and-a-half-year-old chap, and I served for 27 years. I was a weapons electrical engineer. I did sonars, radar, and weapon systems. One of my last jobs was part of the team that was designing weapon systems, which ironically involved us coming out to the States and working with the American Navy off San Diego, developing new weapons which now are being used in the world today, which is sort of a sense of pride. But yeah, and then in 1991, the Gulf War reared its ugly head. At the time, I wasn't on a ship, but I pleaded desperately. I felt I had to be on the pointed end doing my day job, and eventually I sailed to the Gulf in 1991, and I was involved in an operational incident that left me in hospital for 5 years. At the time, I was also happily married to a civilian nurse, Sandra, and I had two very young preschool children, Liam and Zoe. And yeah, life changed quite dramatically following the injury in the Gulf in 1991, 35 years ago.
Please tell us a little bit more about the injuries.
I suffered a traumatic brain injury, and the extent of that was I'd lost 50% of my life history. And none of that memory has ever come back. I've never had flashbacks to any point of it, but I don't remember my wife and children. I couldn't read, write, walk, or talk. And I found that very difficult. And I was aware that I had a family, but I had no emotional ties to them. And I'd also, part of the head injury had robbed me of love, hate, happiness, and sadness. And I believe as a human being, you can't function with the loss of one of those emotions. And I'd lost all of them. And yeah, I have to admit it to this audience. I'm not proud, but it was part of my life. I had two major attempts of suicide because I didn't want to be dependent on people. I was a proud naval officer. And though I had no sense of loss of family, the family I did remember was the Royal Navy. And I didn't want to be a burden on everyone. So I had two major attempts of suicide. But if any listeners are out there and watchers, suicide is a very permanent solution to a temporary problem. And I'm very thankful that the medical teams that I was involved with, pulled me back from the brink twice. I don't deserve it necessarily, but they never gave up on me. But yeah, I was in a place I didn't want to be. And, to this day, I've no memory of Sandra and the children. And yeah, it wasn't, it was almost like having Alzheimer's in a reverse sense, and to this day, I can't remember anything about my children pre-Gulf.
You come back and you're hospitalized, and in the post-hospital, you have this encounter with a phenomenal canine. Can you share this life-changing story?
Yeah, well, my wife and I would go out just to avoid the confrontation at home. I wasn't happy. I didn't love Sandra. She was always nagging me, but that was because she was a wife and a nurse, but I didn't see it as that. And one day we were out and we saw a family puppy walking a guide dog puppy. And that's when you take a puppy at 8 weeks old and you look after it for 14 months and socialize it. And Sandra was talking to the lady that had this dog. And then she said, well, maybe that's something I could do, and she applied to another organisation that trains assistance dogs for disabled people in wheelchairs and things, called Canine Partners. And she applied on the Monday. On the Tuesday, they were knocking on the door to make sure that our house was bulletproof for a young puppy. And on the Friday, they delivered her a little F-team dog called Ferdy, a little 8-week-old Labrador puppy. And Sandra puppy walked the dog, went to puppy class every week, learnt the lesson of the week, reinforced it, come back, showed she could do it. And then it was just one day that my daycare bus didn't pick me up, and it was puppy class day, and I had to go with her. And if the man upstairs moves in mysterious ways, on this day he did. And I was wheeled into the training centre. I couldn't communicate, didn't want to communicate, and I was in the corner. And that day there was an 11-month-old Labrador up there called Endal that had health issues. He also had a temperament issue, which wasn't his top score. When you asked him to do something, he wouldn't. And in the assistance dog world, we're looking for a little bit more eagerness than that. But if you dropped something and said, can you pick it up? He would sort of look at you and say, well, you dropped it, you pick it up. And if you wanted him to tug a door open, he'd say, well, if you want to go out, you do it. But that morning, he was one end of the training room, I was the other end. And I'll never know why, but he saw something on the floor by me. He trotted across the training centre, picked the item up and put it in my lap. Well, being the sort of dog with attitude he was, he wanted a treat, praise, reward, and got nothing. And that really hacked him off. And then he went to the mock-up supermarket, took a tin off the shelf, put it in my lap, didn't get a reaction. Went to the grooming parlour, took something off there. I think there were 4 or 5 puppies in my lap by the time he'd finished. Handbags, anything he could find in the training centre. But before I completely disappear under a mound of stuff, the brain switched on for the first time, and I smiled. And that night, Sandra bravely took home the dog she was puppy walking, Ferdy and Endal, and the rest is pretty much history. He stayed for a modest 13 years.
He had his eye on you, buddy.
It was a two-way street, but yeah, he somehow, though I had a very supportive family, and I can never ever praise my wife and children for sticking with me. And out of 95 of us badly injured in the Gulf War in 91, only 5 marriages survive today. And Sandra gave us that sort of platform for Endel to wield his magic. And if there's an animal that could ever teach me love, hate, happiness, and sadness, it was that 4-legged chap who on every day encouraged me to re-engage with a world that I don't actually think I wanted to re-engage with. And I've written down here something I think was important to say. I actually wished at a time my brain injury had been so severe I couldn't think, because I knew I was struggling to put in strategies and plans and memory things, and then I'd forget them the next day. And it was like Groundhog Day. Every day I was back where I started, despite all these strategies. And that really used to frustrate me, because I was cognitive enough to know that I had these issues, but every time I seemed to fight them, I was back to waking up in a new day, back to where I started. And that was quite frustrating for me, very selfishly, because everyone else in the family was suffering it. But in a strange way, Endel didn't seem to find that a problem. If I put my shoes in the fridge, then that was quite normal when you've got a head injury and you don't have to be a student just coming back from university, with a few drinks in your belly, to put your shoes in the fridge. But Endel would compensate and would actually work with me and encourage me and overcome the problems that presented. And he was almost, if I always use the Wallace and Gromit analogy, the really clever dog and the hapless owner. I think it was affectionately meant, but yeah, he was just, I put my hand down and whatever it was I needed was there. And though I couldn't explain to my wife and children, he just knew. And I don't know when Allen ended and Endel started and vice versa.
What does it feel like to all of a sudden have this sense of wanting to smile and re-engage?
I don't know how the brain works in that. And I've worked a lot now in rehab units for people that have brain injuries in car accidents and things like that, strokes and sort of growth in the brain and things. And yeah, I don't know, because it wasn't like a switch had suddenly gone on. There was a lot happening, but it was a constant happening. And it sounds a bit dramatic, but somehow I was in this hole, this pit of despair, and I couldn't see a way out of it. And somehow that dog came into that safe environment and smashed it to pieces. And every day for 13 years, he dragged me further and further. And the speech therapist said my part of the brain that did speech would never work again. But Endal was very encouraging, and if we lived in a very silent world, hat, razor, gloves, coat, he learnt 1,000 commands of signing. And ironically, in the early days, I couldn't communicate with my family, but I could with a dog. And he just knew. And eventually noises become stuttered words become stuttered sentences, and the rest is pretty much history. But it took a dog to sort of encourage that. And I'm never going to criticize. I had the best speech therapists in the world in the military rehab for 5 years. They never gave up, but they just accepted, well, that was going to be it, and maybe later on. But that dog thundered into my life and just transformed it, and there was no going back with Endal. Every step forward, he was behind you, so you just couldn't go back. And it was that he never had a day off ill, he never had a day off sick, he never dropped the baton until the very day he was put to sleep in my lap. He never stopped.
We often talk about identity as something that's stable, but experiences like yours can completely shift that. How did that impact your sense of identity?
I never thought of it was, I mean, obviously it was Alan, Sandra, and the children, Liam and Zoe, but in my sort of the other side of it, it was Alan and Endal. We were as one, and for 13 years, that was just who we were. And yeah, I don't know a life without a dog in it now. I woke up after a long time and a dog was in my life, and I don't know what I did to deserve that loyalty and devotion. But yeah, even with my successive dogs, we were at one. And yes, I love my wife to pieces now. We've remarried, but yeah, it's that I've always been at one with my dogs, and I can't somehow imagine not being that.
And I think that's just one thing that people don't fully understand, how deeply identity is tied to purpose and role.
I mean, one example I'd like to share with you, and it was from the States, that when guys and girls were coming back from the Gulf, they were landing at some really remote desert airports and things like that, and some of the families couldn't fly out there to be with them. And what a local shelter did, and I think it was so inspirational, they had dogs waiting. So when the back of the C-17s flopped down, some guys would come off and girls would meet their family. They'd be waiting there. But there'd be other guys, Marines and such like, coming off that, and there was no one to meet them. And they had these shelter dogs that would come up and greet them and cuddle them. And you'd have a Royal Marine, who's probably one of the hardest military men on the world, on the tarmac crying into the scruff of a dog's neck, because they were so relieved. And, inevitably, somehow those dogs would be adopted by those guys. So, very shrewd of the shelter. But, what made it possible for those guys to hide that emotion, but in the scruff of a dog's neck on a desert airfield, just let that release go? And maybe looking at that sort of analogy, that's how Endal found me. It was that release.
And what sort of difference did that make for you and your peers, to have the dog by your side, their side?
Well, Endal was unique. He learnt to operate an ATM machine by putting the card in, taking the money out. He was the first dog to fly in the cabin of a UK airline. He was voted the world's most intelligent dog. He actually saved my life once when we were hit by a hit and run car and left unconscious in the road. He got up, put me in the recovery position, covered me with a blanket, crawled under a car in the dark, retrieved my mobile phone, barked for help. No one came, and then he went off and got help. And for that, he won the Victoria Cross, which is the highest award for animal bravery. And through all his actions, my children were warming to me. I was not that chap in the wheelchair who was angry and cross all the time. I had an amazing dog, and yeah, my children suffered. When I come back, Dad was in the room, but it wasn't the dad that my daughter could run up and hug. That was so hurtful to her. I wasn't the dad that went away and would do things with her. It was like having someone else's children. And I couldn't warm to them. I have, and believe you me, I've got there, and it's been a long journey. But at that time, but Endal was bringing me back. And maybe he knew, dogs don't live as long as us. So there was always going to be a legacy. And I think Endal's legacy was to bring me back. So when he wasn't here, his work was done.
And it kind of just shows you there that healing isn't just about talking. Sometimes it's about connection, trust, and feeling safe again.
Yeah, I mean, for Sandra, her faith in Endel was she would let me go out on my own. And sometimes, with a very childlike innocence, when you've had a brain injury, I would cross the road without looking, and he would always stop me, and he would always remind me. And if I dropped something, he would pick it up, not necessarily to be rewarded, but just put it back where it fell off my wheelchair, and on we would go. And it wasn't till we did a documentary with CNN of all companies that they were following me, and they saw Endel. I dropped something, he picked it up, put it in the bag on the back of my wheelchair, and we carried on. Had they not filmed it, I wouldn't have never known that, and I didn't realize what he was doing for me through the whole day. And they just followed him for 24 hours. And if my leg fell off the wheelchair, he'd pick it up and put it back. He just did. And it wasn't for praise, it wasn't for adulation, whether it was a sense of duty, but that guy just stepped up to the plate. And I don't know if they changed your life, but he certainly enhanced it. There's no doubt about it.
And emotionally, there, Alan, how did that change for you, that connection?
I suppose emotionally, is that for me, it had to be an animal that taught me love, hate, happiness, and sadness, because he was called the 6 o'clock dog. And every morning he would put his head on the side of my bed, and he would wait for me to open my eyes up. And he had the only way I can describe it to anyone, if you've left a dustbin outside in the hot summer and you open that lid and it gives you that whiff, that was his breath. But every morning, 6 o'clock on the side of my bed, and he would be looking at me. And if I opened my eyes, I was damned. My legs were ripped out, the wheelchair was sundered in. He went to the drawer, he got my knicks and socks out, we went downstairs, he opened the breakfast cupboard. For 13 years I ate cornflakes. I flipping hate cornflakes, but for 13 years that's what I had. His enthusiasm, but I never had time to feel I'm aching. He was always there, and it's a reason to get dressed, to go out and engage. And most of the people watching this and listening to this, he taught me to hate, and I hate people that are cruel to animals. I kind of understand that. But, one day I was saying to someone, oh, I don't remember being married. And a very proud lady touched me on the shoulder and said, no, Popeye, you don't remember the first time, but you will the second. And she got permission from the Queen, because if you're married in England, you can't get married again. You can only bless a wedding. And my argument was, what's the point of blessing something I couldn't remember? So the Queen gave us permission to get remarried again. And when we said for better and worse the second time, we were a little bit wiser than those young couple that first said it. And Endel was my best man at my second wedding, in a matching outfit. And amazing journey which he led me on.
The power of love, wouldn't you say?
It is, and Sandra has stuck with me. A lot of people always see me at the top of the pyramid, but there are so many people behind me have made the journey possible. And my dogs, though Endel's not with us anymore, and I've had a second dog called Endal Junior, and I'm now on to Endal the third. Every dog has played, and Endal took me from that dark place and got me somewhere safe. And Endal Junior kept me there and kept encouraging me to push and push and push. And now Endal the third doing equally the same. And there aren't any barriers. The only barriers to me are man-made, because certainly me and my mate just live it.
Am I right? You now are working with other veterans and community stakeholders in order to assist those who are here. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, I started questioning everything. What had I ever done to deserve Endal in my life? If I look back, I can't think of, well, I was really good there, so God must have been shining down and thinking he can have a cracking dog. I can't ever see what justified it, but one day I woke up and he was there, and for 13 years I had a quality of life that none of us thought we would ever have. And then I realized, if that could happen to me, if a dog could save my marriage, my relationship, bring me back to my children and give me that quality of life, why weren't others benefiting from it? That was, it didn't seem right. I mean, a lot of people say can win the lottery, but having lots of money doesn't make you rich. It's how you help others with that, maybe, give some to charity, make a difference and such like. And that's almost how I felt. And I wanted to set up an organization in the United Kingdom that was specifically for those in the armed forces and frontline responders, policemen, firemen and paramedics. A lot of the emergency services in the UK are ex-services anyway. You tumble out the armed forces and you become a fireman or a policeman or whatever. And so I found a group of like-minded people, and we set up Hounds for Heroes, assistance dogs for injured veterans. and it just leapt off the paper. It seemed like a good idea, and it was what was needed over here. And and from that we've had contacts from all around the world wanting us to help set up similar organizations in America, Australia, and in my naivety, I didn't realize what I was starting. But yeah, Hounds for Heroes leapt off the paper, and it impacted a lot of people.
The two-way impact. There's something really powerful about hearing directly from someone who has lived it.
And one of the things I never wanted was sympathy in my life. I want an empathy, and we have some great, I think the Irish term is some great crack. We crack jokes, we take the mickey out of each other, but there's a kindness and an understanding there. And every time I meet up with them over here, I come back of an evening, normally an evening flight, and I tell them I'm absolutely buzzing. Sometimes I don't think I need the plane to go home because they just uplift me so much. And sometimes I do get fed up of being in a wheelchair. I don't think it's fair. I get angry. But then I'm just reminded, is it worth it? And you look at the world today and think, did we make a difference in 91? But just a day or a weekend or a week out here in their company is a reminder that, yeah, it was worth it. And what we were defending was right. And there is a reason, if I may, from the wheelchair.
There you are. There. Alan and E.T., we can't thank you guys enough. You guys are my heroes.
Well, one of the questions I did see down, and it was, what would I say to veterans and people out there if we're not short of time? And it is, do share your experiences, and the good and the bad as well, because it's a real emotional release, but it's very cathartic as well. And I think just sometimes talking through what you've experienced, good and bad, whether you're in the emergency service or frontliners, getting veterans to share these things is really important, because it's a two-way street. We can learn as well. And a lot of people suffer not on the battlefield, but actually at home in all sorts of things. And we have so much in common, but we don't communicate that well enough.
100%. I couldn't have said any better. We often say healing through storytelling, sharing our stories. So, again, we thank you. This will conclude another episode of Vets and Badges. You can find us on major podcast platforms like Spotify, Apple, Amazon, iHeart, as well as YouTube or Miami'sCommunitiesPapers.com. Look forward to speaking with you next time. Thank you.